kids like me around me in college. I was really young, and I remember like being really like homesick, but having to adjust sort of each time through that process gave me a little bit of grit. I think I could readjust and recalibrate anywhere from there on. And therefore, every time there was a job loss, when I'm building companies, there were, as you know, like when you're building companies, you're running out of money, your employees are leaving you, your customers are leaving you, your product is not coming to market the time you said you thought it would. So all these challenges you're having to constantly recalibrate.
Welcome to EIR Live, where we dive into the lives and lessons of entrepreneurs in residence. I'm Ilya Tabakh, together with my co-host Terrance, ready to bring you closer to the heartbeat of the innovation and entrepreneurial spirit. Every episode, we explore the real stories behind the ideas, successes, setbacks, and everything in between. For everyone from aspiring EIRs to seasoned pros, EIR Live is your gateway to the depth of the entrepreneurial journey and bringing innovative insights into the broader world. Check out the full details in the episode description. Subscribe to stay updated and join us as we uncover what it takes to transform visions into ventures. Welcome aboard. Let's grow together.
All right, welcome to another episode of EIR Live. We're here with my co-host Ilya Tabakh and our esteemed guest, who I like to refer to as MK, right? And you'll learn a lot more about MK on the podcast episode today. It's been a long time coming, my friend. Thank you for coming on to the show. Thank you for coming and willing to share your journey with our audience. And I could introduce MK and I can take 3 days to do it because his track record is just that long, but I won't be able to do him justice like he can do himself and introducing himself to talk about his background, his early days, right? And walking us through his career journey to date, from his entrepreneurship, endeavors in the wild to moving into helping out the ecosystem, helping corporates as well, and then actually moving back and taking a step back and helping people, the next generation of entrepreneurs, focus on their businesses and companies and how they can scale and grow. MK, I won't delay the people any longer. Can you give us a brief introduction of your background and upbringing and how you got to where you're at today?
Thank you for having me, first of all, Ilya and Terrance. Super stoked to be here. MK stands for, what it doesn't stand for is Michael Kors. not to confuse that. But this stands for Musaddeq Khan. That's my full name. When I came to the US, I came to the South, and most people had a hard time pronouncing a 3-syllable name, so I decided to go by MK just to break the ice. I'll tell you a little bit about myself, a little bit about me, sort of my personal background and my professional background. My heritage is from Bangladesh. That's where I was born. I never really lived there long enough to really become a true sort of culturally ingrained into that culture, simply because of the challenges within the country itself, politically, economically. And so my father, who's an engineer, decided to move to Iraq back in 1975, 76, around that time. And that's kind of where I lived for the first few years of my life. Unfortunately, the same thing happened. Iraq-Iran war hit, and then we had to move out again, and then we moved to Kuwait. And that's where I kind of grew up up until about 16 years old. And then 1990, the invasion of Kuwait happened. We were again all displaced. And then we had to move there. I moved to Bangladesh for a little bit, and then came back and settled in the United States, went to school here for college, initially at University of South Alabama in Mobile, and then transferred to Georgia State University, where I finished my bachelor's there under the Robinson College of Business. And from there, basically, I started working as a software engineer for a startup. Initially, I started working for a really big company, and that I could not really get myself acclimated to the culture, to the corporate politics. Did not stay there for more than, I think, a few months, and then found a job at a startup, went to work there. 8 months later, that startup went belly up from the dot-com bust, and then we were out of a job. And so from there, I decided to go and work for another startup, but it was a little bit of a growth stage startup, and was there for 2 years. Then 9/11 event happened, and then again was laid off. And so then I decided that I really didn't want to keep on doing this rigmarole around this corporate, lifestyle, going from job to job. I wanted to sort of chart my own future, and so partnered up with some really amazing people, and decided to start a company, which was in really around revenue and collections, but around the small to the medium hospital systems.
Hey, MK, before we go too far there, one of the things, I moved from Moscow to the U.S. when I was 7. And so in that process, a name like Ilya in Kansas City is also interesting. I sort of stuck it out a little bit. But one of the things that I noticed is it was always helpful for me to sort of know that there's at least 2 or 3, kind of cultural and geographic and sort of these different perspectives you can look at a problem or at a really any situation, right? And it seems like in your sort of upbringing and your foundation, you had a lot of different lenses you can sort of pull out. And even in sort of the early big companies, startup, there's a couple other lenses that you put in. Can you talk a little bit about, how you see that kind of playing out, and whether you sort of see it the same way that I do or not? I've noticed that's been sort of a powerful tool for me. I'm curious how it sort of has landed for you.
Yeah, I think there are 3 things that really played a big role in terms of my sort of personal and professional journey. One is this constant moving around and having to constantly recalibrate. And sort of like, even as a child, when you're moving around, there's a lot of people don't see it. Of course, the adults are, trying to deal with it differently, but, kids are looking at it and they're trying to reframe their mind. What are they supposed to think about it? Obviously, they don't have the same pressures as an adult does, in terms of how am I going to, sort of protect my family, raise my family, raise my children, put them through school, whatever. But kids are sort of going through that same sort of recalibration each time. And so I've had to recalibrate a number of times. But the one that I remember the most vividly is when I came to the US, pretty much on my own. My family was left behind. And it was just, kids like me around me in college. And I was really young. And I remember being really homesick, but having to adjust sort of each time through that process sort of gave me a little bit of grit. I think I could readjust and recalibrate anywhere from there on. And therefore, every time there was a job loss, or there was, when I'm building companies, there were, as you know, when you're building companies, you're running out of money. Your employees are leaving you. Your customers are leaving you. Your product is not coming to market the time you said you thought it would. So all these challenges, you're having to constantly recalibrate, and that sort of background of recalibration every time, I think, gave me that sort of grit to be able to do it, and saying that, okay, it's okay, let's restart. All is not lost. Let's keep going. That was a major part of that. The other thing is, Ilya, I'll tell you, is I like to call myself the product of the American South, because I am, for everyone listening out there, I'm 50 years old, half a century on this planet, and 34 years of those I have spent in the United States, and most of them, or all of them, I have lived in the South, Alabama, and then Georgia. And I like to say I'm a Southern boy. I don't know if you can tell by my accent. I love grits. I love Waffle House, right? So there you go. I started my first company in 2002. Left that, exited that in 2005. Then did a bunch of little roles here and there around product and commercializing product and managing product. And then started my second startup in 2008, which is around the Great Recession. And so took advantage at the time where everybody was leaving leaving their jobs, and people think like, okay, when recessions or depressions or any kind of economic turmoil happens, is it a good time is to start a job to start a company or look for a job? And I think those are the best times to start companies, because that's where you find amazing resources that are looking for work. And that's the time where you kind of, and through those kind of recessions, a lot of things that come up that if you can really listen in into the market. For example, when the Great Recession happened, the ARRA Act was enacted. A part of that was this $11 billion going into this energy market, and really, sort of upgrading the American electric grid and rolling out these smart devices like smart meters and in-home devices and all of that. And there was a ton of things going on there. And so I decided to take advantage of that and really built this first public cloud system in the utility space where we could manage huge amounts of data that was going to be sort of coming out of these smart meters and smart devices. That company was eventually acquired in 2014 by one of the meter manufacturers out there. Funny, like we were actually the first company that was selling a product in the utility space that was used to this huge sort of enterprise products with millions of dollars, and we were selling the first SaaS product in that space through the through the AWS cloud back in the day, which was not much known, and we were selling it sort of like an app based system, and we were called like the iTunes of the smart grid. And that was sort of a great thing that we kind of sort of latched onto. From there, I went and started a number of other companies. That was kind of like 50-50 success. But really, I started working within corporate innovation. Started with the first one was with Best Buy. I remember, sort of when Best Buy was about to go out of business, where at the time where they were getting their lunch eaten by Amazon, Circuit City, Montgomery Ward, Sears, if you remember back in the day, was kind of like getting like disrupted. And the question was, will Best Buy be around? And so they had to change, they had to rethink. And so I was within this group of people where they're trying to bring all of Best Buy's products online in a way that could be distributed around the world by anybody. And so basically we built this $120 million API business, just by exposing all of Best Buy's infrastructure, from distribution to payments to, product SKUs and all of that. So that was amazing. And then after that, I got this sort of real amazing experience around, okay, this is interesting.
Let me ask you a question, MK, before you go into to the next part, because I have a few threads, right, that I like to sort of grab as you're walking through, which is, your upbringing across, three different places. You get to the U.S. in the South, right? You go to Georgia State, you graduate from the School of Business. But to be clear for our audience, MK, majored in information systems, and did some work in engineering as well, right? Where he got his early chops, right, from a school around, building technology-based and software-based products, essentially. And in that experience, talk to us about, you started talking about your first company and your second company, right, which was acquired. Talk to us about your experiences in product management, right? And how did those experiences help you, right? As you were like going back and forth between starting companies in the wild, right, and taking on product roles as well. Did the product management role help you sort of in helping to form those companies a little bit better as you continue to learn more and shape yourself as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think at heart, I am a product person. I'm a product guy. And what I mean by that is sort of like, it's not the skill sets that I have that makes me that. It's my mindset of how I look at a product or a solution. And that is through the lens of the customer and the problem. And so most people out there are trying to build features where I'm focusing on what is going to be the outcome of what I'm building and how it's going to really help my end user or my customer. And that sort of mindset, when I'm starting a business and a company, going out there and having conversations with my potential users or customers, I'm not trying to sell them a product. What I'm trying to sell them on is their problem. and they're sort of like where they're trying to get to. What does that end goal look like? And then coming back from that and sort of building that the most models version of that to test out and experimentation and experiment and run experimentation within the customer premise. And that's what I'm doing now with Nokia Ventures as well, is kind of like talking with customers, really understanding where they are, where they want to go, and how we can take them, on that journey through that process and solve that problem through what we're offering.
Absolutely. And before you go to Nokia, we're definitely going to circle back to Nokia Ventures. But there's a few things that you said in there. One, I like the think that you being adaptable for moving around and having to reinvent yourself in different ecosystems and geos and around different people made it a lot easier for you to go out. Not that it was easy, but made it a little bit digestible to go out and have those customer conversations to uncover deep pain that these people were facing and to try to figure out a value proposition that you can position against those pains and problems that they were facing. Right. I believe that a lot of the folks that we start to interview, on EIR Live, they have this thread of being adaptable, being forced to reinvent themselves in new environments, right? And not being afraid to take the leap and raise their hand, right, for certain things. And we've already sort of uncovered a bit of that about you. Hey, I could have took a job, right, in 2008, but instead I just started to go and create them and start my own company, right? Like it's that risk taking, that appetite that you build up over time as an entrepreneur. And I just don't want to lose that thread, MK, in your background. But you're about to go to the next part.
Well, hold on. I got one more question.
There you go.
Actually.
You lean in, please.
Knowing something about selling to utilities, and kind of taking that product mindset. I'm curious, in sort of your second startup, what did you learn about, anytime you say iTunes for cloud and utility, for startup and technology folks, that's super exciting. For operations folks, that's scary, right? It's new, it's different. My phone crashes. What happens? I just want to kind of pick at that a little bit because I'm sure there's a couple learnings that you were able to sort of figure out from 2008 to 2014 that I'm hoping that you can share a little bit of that with us.
Yeah, that's great. So I'll just say, so the first thing is, like, when I talk about iTunes, I'm talking about not the solution itself, but the business model. So utilities are really big structures, and in the United States, the utility market is really sort of big and fragmented in many ways. And there are a lot, but there are only a very, very small group of vendors that actually sell into it. But they sort of monopolize it in ways where they sell really, really big solutions where, like, only 20% of that solution may be applicable to the customer at one point, at any point, but the customer has to pay up front and spend all this budget. And there are reasons for that. There's CapEx and all that stuff. But what we decided to do was we decided that we wanted to go after this small segment of utilities, specifically the cooperatives, where they didn't have big budgets, they didn't have big IT departments, and this goes into sort of like, you have to sort of understand your customer segment and customer niche and how they operate in order to really sort of build a business around that ecosystem of that segment. And so when we said iTunes, we said, hey, these utilities, these cooperatives, they have the same problems as this other big investor-owned utilities or big municipalities, but they may not have the whole budget. At the same time, they want to solve the same problems of reliability and efficiency. And so we said, what if we only sold them what they needed to solve at that point in time? So for example, if they wanted to do outage management or outage analysis or blink analysis for that matter, let's sell them only that part of the solution and then charge them only for that part of the solution, instead of trying to sell them the whole big platform and say, you have to buy the whole thing whether you use it or not. But and if you when you decide to use it later, you don't have to pay later, but you have to pay up right now. And we said, no, let's not. We don't want to do that. We want to charge for this problem that they're solving, and the solution that we will be delivering to solve that specific problem. That's how that came. The other thing, Ilya, is interesting that I've learned over the last 18 years in the utility space or regulated space or any regulated body. There's two things that really drive regulated bodies to really move and buy or make decisions. One is what I call the carrot and the stick, right? So for example, very recently, I went and worked as a chief product officer for a company called Blue Conduit, where these two professors from University of Michigan built this machine learning model where you could identify the lead service lines underground. Right before that, in the city of Flint, for example, where people were dying of lead poisoning, there were engineering firms going out there and digging everywhere. And then sometimes they would find it, sometimes they wouldn't. And that rate was about 15%, right? That means if they dug 100 times, they only found a lead service line or a pipe 15 of those times. And the other 85 times they didn't. But the utilities or the municipalities or the city would still have to pay up because the digging costs money. So these professors came up with a way where they could actually do it with predictive modeling, and that success rate was about 85 or 90%. And so, we went there. I was sort of helping them sort of bring that product to market. But what I really learned was there's two things that drive. So one was a carrot. Actually, let's start with the stick. So the stick was the government said, by October of 2024, we're in October 2024, amazingly. This was 2 years ago. Every water municipality, which is about 56,000 of them, must come up with a inventory of all their service lines that are servicing their customers, right? Now, the challenge with that is all of these municipalities, these 56,000 municipalities, most of their records are not digitized, right? They have paper records, and many of them, ironically, has water damage or something like that. It's in the basement somewhere.
And not only that, a lot of them have, when you build something, you get sort of your engineering drawings. You may be lucky that you get as-builts, but then you sort of maintain and replace. And then in many cases, municipalities don't have this as much, but definitely utilities do. They merge and you sort of bring together different entities. And so, that's also, there's a bunch of other variables, but without a doubt, like the knowing what you have in your either collection or distribution system is a huge problem, especially as folks are, trying to kind of turn that system more modern. So definitely hear you there.
Yeah. So that was a stick, right? Like if they don't come up with that inventory by this set time, that they will face penalties, right? So that was a stick. Now, the carrot part of that was the Biden administration through the Infrastructure Jobs and Investment and Jobs Act, the IIJA, and then the Inflation Reduction Act, basically allocated about, I think, initially 15 to 20 billion dollars that they said, hey, if you produce an inventory and you can show us that you have service lines to replace the poisonous lead service lines, we will give you money from that, from that grant. So there was this carrot and a stick. And so in the regulated bodies, when there's these two things can sort of colliding together, coming together, is where the opportunity is. And so in the ARRA Act, like I said, there was this $11 billion going out to the utilities that, hey, there's money here. You can, take advantage of this and upgrade your grid and all of that. But then the other part of that was they also said, by the way, you cannot raise rates. That means you cannot just go willy-nilly raise rates on your customers. So their revenue was very, very, becoming sort of limited in some ways. And that's happening today even, right? Like the government is saying, hey, climate change is happening, whether you believe it or not. Carbonization is happening. We need to decarbonize. And therefore, you cannot just go and build more power plants. We're not going to let you do that. Also, you cannot, just build more wires and then charge your customers, through the rate plan, because we're not going to let you do that. However, though, if you want to go and build non-wire solutions, like you want to serve your customers through microgrids, maybe battery storage, through these other means of wind and solar, rooftop solar, and you want to do it that way, where we're happy to give you grants to do that. And so that kind of carrot and stick is still there. And so that's where you sort of find your niche and your segment that wants to take advantage of that and provide solutions there.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for letting us kind of defer. I just didn't want to miss, that's a really interesting and weird field. And so I didn't want to just gloss it over. But Terrance, I'll toss it back over to you to take us forward here.
I really like that story, MK, because it shows that you can do a role as a chief product officer or advising a company on product that's truly going to deploy impact at scale, not just for the business, but for the residents and the people who was experiencing that problem on the actual ground. And I like to think that entrepreneurs like yourself and others that we've sort of like engaged on the podcast, they also they get a high from going to solve those sort of problems, in the world, things that are going to actually be impactful to people. And you started to touch on something that I love to bring up when I'm talking coaching different founders, which is there's a few reasons why people do business with you or will do business with your startup or your company. One, you're helping them to make more money. You're helping them save money. You're helping them, meaning you're reducing costs. Or the third one that I like to say is you're helping them stay out of jail, right? Or be more compliant, right? And the timing is also an important aspect of this, because that act that had just passed that made 11 billion available at the same time you were solving that problem in the company that you were doing at the time, right? Made it a happy medium, right? But sometimes you just have to go and get started, right? And the other pieces will start to fall into place around you. So I think great on you and your co-founders and the team for one, seeing that around the corner, being able to look around corners, finding a way to use a very regulated industry and process to actually capitalize on that to solve a problem, but also move the business forward. So you just touched on a few of those things. But lastly, you left off talking about your chief product role, the work you had done around building the API business up, at Best Buy. Now let's talk about the bridge, right? Talk to us about your first entrepreneur in residence role that you took on not long after you left the Best Buy role, and you've done things before that at Itron Idea Labs. Could you talk to us about that experience?
Actually, that's a very special role that I will never forget, and I'll tell you the reason in a minute. But going back to what you were saying is being a founder, being an entrepreneur is about being willing to be uncomfortable and willing to be okay with ambiguity and risk. And that's what it takes if you really want to be a founder and willing to fail many, many times over and over again and willing to be wrong. After I sold my second company, which was to one of the largest meter manufacturers in the United States, a company called Census. And by the way, if you live in Georgia and if you go in your power producer is Georgia Power, if you go outside your house and look at your smart meter, it'll say Census FlexNet. That's the company that acquired my company, and all of their analytics on the back office that happens is through the product we built, and that's what they acquired. So after I sold that, I had a little bit of there was a non-compete. I could not work for some of their competitors. 2 years after that, I was approached by a company called Itron, which is really the big 800-pound gorilla in the utility space around smart metering, IoT devices, and such. And Itron said, "Hey, you did this. You sold it to Census. We're trying to build this. Come on, join us." I said, "Okay, sounds like a plan. I could do it." So I went into Itron Corporate, and 3 months later, into the job, I came to the realization I could not do it. I could not do it because everybody thinks, "Oh, that startup did it. We should be able to do it." What they don't realize is that most big companies cannot get out their own way to really do something innovative, right? Because VPs gotta keep their jobs. Directors got to keep their budget. The technology stack, even though it's legacy, can't be changed, because if it's changed, then somebody's not going to have their job anymore or not going to be relevant anymore. And so being willing to really do the hard things, like I think Ben Horowitz talks about it in his book about the hard things about hard things, where he faced multiple times, like death, almost, close to death of the company at Opsware. And then each time he came out of it willing to do the hard thing and making tough changes is something that, that I realized that they were not willing to do, and I was not going to be around. And so I decided to not to be around. But around the same time that was happening, a gentleman by the name of Roberto Ayalo, and this is the person I want to really call out, Roberto Ayalo. He's no longer with us. He passed away last year. He was my coach and mentor, and he saw me for who I am and what I am and sort of how I operate. And he said, "MK, you are here at Itron at the right time, but you're in the wrong place." I was like, "Well, I don't know what that means." And he said, "Well, I am building this entity within Itron. It's called Itron Idea Labs, where we will be disrupting business and finding new business models and launching new products and solving hard problems. And I am looking for an EIR." And I was like, "What's an EIR?" I don't know. I don't know what that means. What do they do? Because I really don't want to get stuck in a job where people are like, "What does MK do all day?" And that's exactly, if you go around in most companies that have EIRs, and if you go outside the EIR ecosystem around the broader company and ask somebody, "Hey, do you guys have EIRs?" They're like, "Yeah, we do, but we don't know what they do." Right? And you'll hear that a lot all the time. Like, what does an EIR do?
I actually love leaning into that, because when I introduced myself at Black and Veatch, internally even, I'm like, "Hey, I'm the entrepreneur in residence," and that probably means you have no idea what I do. And in many cases, most of the company doesn't. But it's in some ways kind of a bit of a superpower, because you get to, first of all, get everybody to come out of their autopilot. Because if I was process engineer 4, they're like, "Oh, I roughly know what you do," and, kind of put you in the box. But it's always good to sort of pull folks and be able to frame that up. And so I actually have seen that. But I hear definitely what you're saying. I just have intentionally leaned into that in some ways. And it's been really good, because it allows you to sort of talk about generally what you do, but also listen to, what do you do at the organization, or what do you do kind of in the market? And you can sort of frame up, here's how I could be kind of helpful, here's insights I can share. And so I've actually found that to be kind of an accidental, awesome superpower, as opposed to a bug. But yeah, no, definitely have the same experience there.
Yeah, I mean, you'll see, when you go into a presentation and in a room full of people and you say you're an EIR within the company, and if it's a dark room, you turn on the lights, you'll see everybody either rolling their eyes or looking like deer in a headlights. Like, okay, what does this guy do? And so it's really interesting. But what I tell them is like, look, you guys are here helping the company pays its bills, and I'm here to make sure the company sticks around long enough for you guys to keep on doing that. Because the only constant in this world is change, and everyone will be disrupted. And so therefore, I want to make sure that this company isn't, and therefore here I am. And they're like, "Okay, that kind of makes sense." They're still kind of skeptical, but over time, they kind of get it. But Itron Idea Labs, that's where kind of I got my first chops as an EIR. Roberto brought me in, and Roberto, one thing about him was he told me, he's like, "MK, I don't ever want you to come and ask me for permission. Come to me for apology, but not for permission." He said, "That's it." And he let me loose. And there I was, going and talking with customers, discovering problems, building sort of like a solution to sort of figure out, okay, how can utilities make sure that their delivery, their power is always balanced? The power that they serve to their customers don't go off balance, right? Kind of, if you think about it, like in the North American grid, it's a three-phase system. They have three wires, right? And the idea is like when power is flowing, each of those wires are going to be flowing equal amount of power, like 33%, right? Around that. But most of the time, what happens, it goes out of whack, right? Outages happen, people, and then what happens is one wire only has 80%, the other one is like 10%, and the other one is 5%, and the other one is losing power or something. And so the only way to do that is every few years they spend millions of dollars going out there with physical equipment and touching every wire to make sure that they're balancing the load. And they get to some percentage of that, but most of the times they don't. And so we were using data, like very simple hourly voltage data, and running machine learning algorithms to figure out we could do that without any hardware and just pure software. And we were getting like amazing success rates. And the same thing with like making sure that the transformers are balanced and they have they're serving the right amount of households or so on and so forth. So that was my EIR role at Itron Idea Labs. I was there for 3 years. It was my favorite. Roberto got cancer. He was hospitalized. And so when he left, what changed was the culture. And one thing I realized, what I learned as an EIR, it's not, again, the skill set of the individual, it's the mindset of the business for EIR to be successful. And it's the culture that's built within that little entity of the EIR's ecosystem that you have to have for the EIRs or the entrepreneurs in residence to thrive, and let them do what they're hired to do, right? And really, if you think about it, like, what's the job of an EIR? Like, why, or what does entrepreneur in residence really mean? And that is basically bringing their experience as an entrepreneur, which is taking risks, failing fast, trying things, and really sort of moving without any kind of barriers, any sort of that corporate backlog is kind of what an EIR is supposed to be doing. And if that culture doesn't exist, or that mindset doesn't exist within the business leadership to let them do that, it doesn't work. And so Roberto kind of made sure that was there, and he sort of, there was a group of EIRs, we were there, a number of us. He kind of made sure he blocked and tackled that. But when he left, that was gone, and the culture changed, and so therefore I couldn't be there anymore, and so I had to leave as well. And so that, I was there for about 3 years, and when he was gone, and then eventually Roberto came back, and it wasn't the same. Roberto went and worked at Meta with Reality Labs, and he was there, and then that's where he got sick again, and then eventually passed away. But he was my rock, and he was my mentor and my coach, and he kind of allowed me to really develop into this EIR role and sort of this job, if you will.
So a quick comment, MK, before we move on, because one, I appreciate you sharing that story about Roberto, and really cool how you landed your first opportunity. But it also shows that people, not companies, not ideas, but people keep us around doing the things that we're doing. And I think that's an important thing to pick up on. The second thing that I want to share with our audience who's listening to this podcast is that almost all the EIRs we talked to had no clue what an EIR was or what they did, even though they had already been operating in the wild as an entrepreneur, right? So, your EIR gig or your role could come to you at any point, any time, and you might have that similar reaction like Ilya, like MK, like myself, because I sure did. I was like, what the hell is that? What is an EIR? What do they do again? And every single person in the company, to MK's point about culture and mindset, they need to have that mindset. Otherwise, you shouldn't probably have an EIR inside of your organization. And I'm going to toss it over to Ilya now.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna pile on. This is almost like a tag team wrestling match here. I'm coming in over the ropes, but the way that I talk about this is, in order to be kind of an effective entrepreneur in residence, because Terrance is completely right. I dropped into my EIR role. I knew sort of what capabilities I could bring to the org. But I think in order to be effective, you sort of have to know the org, need to be able to translate. So the way when I talk about these things, I say, kind of, what's your secret sauce? What capabilities do you have? MK, you were talking about product. You were talking about sort of early stage, kind of 0 to 1, being able to get these things to market. Those are all like important to talk about because many of the folks you're talking to don't necessarily have that background, or even in some cases don't know that it's important. And so I think it's incumbent on the EIR to be able to sort of capture that and be able to kind of explain it. And I know some folks that are really good at it, and other folks that are really rock stars are not great at explaining, why are they the best guitarist in the world as far as the EIR is concerned. But they are, right? And it's really important to capture that. The second part is sort of understanding how it sort of lands on the core strategy, and also how innovation enables the core strategy of the organization. In most cases, the parent organization hasn't done the work to be able to answer that question. But I actually encourage folks that are thinking about an EIR role to sort of dig into that and spend a couple beats understanding, how much of the leadership time is spent on innovation. Is there sort of an enunciated innovation strategy, budget, time, all the things that are important, just understanding how the org thinks about it. And then kind of more recently, the third part is, in many cases, when you're in the wild and doing your own thing, you don't have to sort of do consensus building and sort of understanding organizational dynamics as much. And so I think there is like really kind of a bit of a reskilling part, especially if you're going to be more on like the horizontal, so working on the capacity of the organization. I think the vertical, so like if you're running a business line or spinning one out, that's easily translatable from being in the wild, although many of the things you described make it very frustrating. But that's kind of the framework I use. And I'm sorry to cut you off a second when I was talking, but I found that helpful for folks to sort of wrap their head around. Okay, that makes sense. I can explain, some of this experience in a different way. And then by knowing what the core strategy and how innovation enables the core strategy, how the leadership team's spending time on it, what the priorities are, that gives me a lot of insight. And I found like lots of folks that kind of resonates with them. So I just wanted to share that in the discussion here.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, one of the things when I go into an EIR role, or if I'm interviewing for one or talking to someone about it, there is the most important thing that I want to learn and I want to understand is that how much money they're investing into this role, and when do they need that money back, right? Because look, at the end of the day, a big corporation coming down from board directors to CEO, somebody saying, hey, I'm going to put this much amount of money into this initiative where I'm going to have these group of people, call them EIRs or whatever you want to call them, or innovation leaders. And the question always somebody should ask is, when are you expecting this money back? Which is the return on investment and how much of it? And if that answer is like next year, I'm out, because I'm like, there's nothing happening next year or even the year after, right? It's just like angel investing, right? We all angel invest. I'm sure all of us do. I do, and Terrance, you do, Ilya, you do as well. When I'm investing as an angel in a company, that money is, I'm playing with house money. I'm like, I'm not getting it back. I know, like, if it comes back, great. But I'm investing in the founder and the idea and the passion I have around it. And it's the same thing. If you are building an EIR or an innovation organization, you're putting $1 million, $2 million, $3 million bucks. The CEO better be like, hey, this money's probably going to go to waste, but something comes back, it'll be great. It's kind of like what those tier one venture capitalists do, or in the Bay Area especially, or even any VCs. Like, we're going to invest in 100 companies, and probably 50 of them are going to fail. 20 of them are probably going to do the first base. Another 20 of them is going to probably do the second base. And then 9 of them will probably go to third base. But then there's going to be this one that's going to do a home run, and that's going to make up for the rest of the fund. And so if you look at it from an EIR investment perspective, innovation, you're saying, okay, I'm going to put $1 million in this, and 900,000 of this is going to go to waste. But this other 100,000 could really build something, and it's going to come back 10 times, and that's what we're banking on. And that's it. And if it doesn't happen, we'll do it again the next year after, and we'll keep on trying it, because the cost of not doing it is that doing nothing. And then what happens? We become the BlackBerry of the world.
You know what? Okay, I love that. I love how you're applying the power law of venture capital to sort of the EIR role and how people should be thinking about it sort of, long term. if you will. And it's a perfect actual segue to to the other sort of part we want to take you to, which is talk to us about your EIR role at Georgia State, right, for the Mainstreet Fund and investing in those entrepreneurs, right, living out sort of what on the other side of the table. Can you talk to us a little bit more about your roles at Georgia State and ATDC as an entrepreneur in residence?
Georgia State's Mainstreet Entrepreneur Seed Fund is a perfect example of putting money in founders, no matter where they are, who they are, what business do they lead. And there's a reason we call it the Mainstreet Fund. I'll talk about that in a minute. But my role at the Mainstreet Fund as an EIR is really originally they I think I like the original name. Although initially when they hired me for I didn't, they called it the startup shepherd, and I was like, I don't like that. I'm not sure. I'm not. Sounds more like a sort of like a Jesus Christy kind of thing, and I really don't feel I don't have that mantle. So I like the EIR, so I changed it to an EIR. But now that I go back, I'm like, actually, I'm a startup shepherd, right? I'm shepherding these founders and startups and trying to get them to this, making sure that they're not going off trail and going to the next to that next part of the journey. But over there, I manage businesses and founders that are literally ideas on a napkin. They could be companies that are technology companies. They could be companies that are tech enabled. As a matter of fact, I talked with a founder yesterday from one of the from one of the cohorts. She's building this beauty care product, kind of like sort of using the new iPhone features that you could really analyze your skin and then sort of get consultation. And so basically over there, with the technology companies, they could be tech enabled or they could have nothing to do with technology, right? And you will see this founder who's thriving right now. She came into the first cohort of the Mainstreet, and she had a sewing school, and she was helping, found people who could not get into expensive design schools like SCAD, for example, with helping teaching them how to design clothes, sewing, and then sort of placing them into jobs. And now she's transformed into this amazing business where she's helping hundreds of designers, placing them in different places. So that had nothing to do with technology at all, and that's why we call it the Mainstreet Seed Fund, because it is for every company, not just a tech company, not just tech enabled, but any company. It could be a coffee shop, it could be a STEM school. And it's focused on really underrepresented women-led businesses, right? And that's we want to focus on them. And Georgia State, if you think about it, like it's the in the state of Georgia, it's the largest school. You hear about UGA and Georgia Tech and Emory, but Georgia State is the largest school in the state of Georgia right now, and it is the largest student population of minority students outside of an HBCU, one of the largest in the United States. And so that's what I do there. At ATDC, what I work on is on companies that have achieved at least or on their way to achieve $1 million in revenue or funding, and they get to their next level. And sort of I work as sort of a coach to really the CEOs of the businesses and the founders of the businesses to really understand their organization, their product. For example, I was talking to one of the founders the other day where their product metrics is all off, right? I'm like, how are you measuring whether your product is being used? You're not getting users are falling off. And I looked at them like, what are your metrics? And they're like revenue. I'm like, well, that's not a metric. That's like a trailing metric. Like, how are you getting the revenue? What are the things that are leading you to that, right? What are your leading metrics? And so I was helping them with that. Another company I worked with the other day, I was working with was they're everywhere, right? I'm like, what is your segment? How are you going to market? Which is your target segment? And who are you selling to? Because if you don't know who your ideal customer profile or ideal buyer profile is and why they're buying or why would they buy your stuff, it doesn't make any sense. So going back, the Mainstreet Seed Fund is basically, if you think about it, like like the tech stars of the world, and a incubator had a baby, right? Basically, we bring in companies through this process. We give them investment anywhere from 15 to 20,000 in realm, but we don't invest. Like it's not we don't take any equity in the company. We give it to them as a grant. So we don't take any money back, but we also tranche the money in layers so that they can meet with certain milestones and so that we know that they're on track, and I manage those companies throughout the process. We've done about 4 cohorts. We've graduated about 60 companies through that process. So far. The initial fund came from the Marcus Foundation. We also got money later on from Bank of America and Georgia Power and Coca-Cola and some individual donors like Ahmed Bozer. So I mean we continue to do that for the Mainstreet Seed Fund, and that's sort of my happy place because I'm a Georgia State alumni. And that's my passion. I want to help as many founders from Georgia State University as possible. And really, my goal is like to talk to a founder every day for the rest of my life. And that's what I do. I find some way, somehow, to have a conversation with a founder and help them in some way. And that's sort of how I want to give back and continue to give back. And that's from an entrepreneur perspective, that's the best thing I can do.
That's awesome. So we mentioned kind of your most recent role in Nokia Ventures and sort of how you've kind of gone back to the future in some ways. Can you talk a little bit about that and kind of what you're excited about there? And then maybe like the other thing that's fun is you've sort of built a little bit of a portfolio of things that you do. And so I want to kind of dig into that a little bit as well.
So let's talk about Nokia Ventures. So Nokia Ventures, and I'm not giving anything up here, but we all know Nokia as the failed phone company, right? But that was a very small part of the business, right? And it's funny. I was talking to one of the senior vice presidents who happens to be my cousin actually at Nokia. And he's he's amazing. He used to work with the Bell Labs, and now he's on the technology side. But he was telling me like, the original research that led to the formation of the iPhone, which is the touch screen. And all of that was actually came out of Bell Labs and out of Nokia, right? But some executive decided that who wants that? Somebody decided, some guy in some ivory tower decided that, I don't think anybody would want to pay so much money for that stuff. What? Very nice idea. Let's put that on the shelf, right? And then what happened? And that tells me like, if there was an EIR in that room, some founders, some entrepreneurs were like, guys, can we at least have some conversations and discovery around this to see that will this dog hunt, right? But there was no one there, right? Some big board member, some chairman, some guy said, no, not worth it. Let's keep on making the small little phones and selling those. And guess what happened? There's no more Nokia phones, right? Or at least phone business. So, but what people don't realize, Nokia's footprint is pretty much everywhere around the world because at the end of the day, they're a telecommunications, broadband provider. Their technologies from 3G, 4G, 5G, and now going to 6G, they've enabled amazing stuff around that and continue to do that. And what's happened is through a number of different acquisitions and roll-ups, they landed on Bell Labs. So Bell Labs, which is originally the AT&T business, was divested. Lucent Technologies bought it. Then Alcatel bought Lucent, and then Nokia bought Alcatel, Lucent, and it all came back to a full circle, right? And Bell Labs is an amazing research business. Some people don't know, like they have Nobel Peace Prize, they have Nobel Prizes attached to them. They were the original inventors that led to the invention of transistors that we talk about in our radio, telecommunications, and telephones, whatever you want to call it. So they have all these research, but at the end of the day, that research doesn't mean anything if it doesn't drive some kind of revenue in some way. And so the CEO and the leadership at Nokia decided to start this Nokia Ventures, where basically they bring in people to commercialize some of this research. And one of that research happens to be in this energy and utility space, where we are basically taking this technology of streaming data, real-time data, and applying it to like, non-wire solutions around like battery storage and microgrids and rooftop solar and all of that, and kind of looking into them and how they can, utilities and energy companies can leverage those technologies and sort of really save money or even make money, if you will.
That's awesome. So what's it like kind of having a portfolio of, it seems like you're super passionate about the Main Street venture kind of work. Kind of seems like you're well on your way to talking to an entrepreneur a day for the rest of time, which is amazing. I mean, that's like a really good way of saying it. I actually worked for a guy that built a transportation program at Oak Ridge National Lab for 30 years, and then came to the University of Kansas as kind of his second career. And I could just tell that, he gained energy from just being on campus and being around, kind of younger, energetic folks. So I definitely hear the connection. But how do you think about sort of this, portfolio, being able to choose and kind of decide how you kind of deploy your time and your resources? Because that's something that sort of I've seen happens in, maybe not the first season of an entrepreneur's life, right? And it's kind of a cool perspective to have. So maybe if you could talk about that for, a minute or two. It seems like you have kind of an interesting perspective there.
My wife has a big problem with me, which is like my lack of sleep. Like I don't sleep much, and she says, it's going to catch up to me at some point. Maybe it has already. I don't know about it, but to me, every time I go to sleep, I can't wait to wake up again and doing the things that I do. Whether it's working with Nokia's business, talking with customers. I just love doing that. I love talking with, especially the customers I work with, in the utility space, just listening to them and about the hard problems to solve. And then what really keeps me going the rest of the day is coaching and mentoring founders and entrepreneurs. And the thing is, like, it doesn't feel like work. It's like I feel like I'm things that they're asking are so second nature to me and has been for a while that it doesn't feel like, I'm sort of telling them, and I feel great that I'm able to share that and sort of guide them in a way that they can like go towards, a certain outcome. Like, for example, I was talking with this founder yesterday, and she's trying to launch this business around skincare, and she's talking about consultation, and she's talking about dermatologists, and she's talking about compliance. I'm like, don't worry about any of that. Find a high school grad, just graduated. Tell them for every consultation they do, you're going to pay them 50. Your lifetime value of your each customer is probably going to be 500, and basically that's 10% of the lifetime value, and that's great. And don't worry about compliance. Don't worry about all this stuff. That's it, right? As long as they're certified dermatologists, that's good enough. And she was like, I never thought of it this way. Okay, I was thinking about hiring a doctor and doing all this stuff. When you hear certain things, you've done it. I've done it so many times. We all have done it so many times. It just comes to you, right? It's just like you're training, like a Navy SEAL, when they're going into battle, right? Their training just kicks in, right? It doesn't matter. Like you just, your brain start working certain ways, and you're like, oh, I know the solution. I know what we should be doing, right? The challenge isn't that, right? The challenge really is on the other side, is whether, and that's something you don't control and we can't control, is like, will the founder listen? Will the CEO listen? And as founders, me included, we have a really high ego. We think we know everything. And over the time, now that I'm 50, I've learned that I need to be in a learn-it-all mode all the time versus in a know-it-all mode. And sometimes it's hard to do because people are like, oh, I know the answer. I already know this. This is my industry and this is that. And I've done this. And you're like, no, you got to like let all of that go and start from, be willing to be wrong, be, willing to start from scratch. And I think that's the hardest thing, right? I mean, the problem, and that's why I'm like, it's hard for corporate employees many times to become founders, right? Because in the corporations, you are working on a transaction basis. 2 weeks paycheck, 2 weeks paycheck, 2 weeks paycheck, and that's what you're working towards. Where you come to a startup or building a company in an EIR, you're working on a transformation. And so that transaction mindset has to go away, right? In the corporate world, you're working as a mercenary. In the startup world, you're working as a missionary. You're on a mission to make an impact, to solve a problem, to change things, to disrupt things, to be willing to brave enough to tell people like the way it's being done now is wrong. It's not going to work. We don't need more horses. We need a better automobile, right? So, like that kind of mindset. It's hard to acquire, right? I don't think it's something you can learn. It's something that you have to like intentionally sort of over time train your mind and train your thought process to.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of want to pick apart a couple things. You sort of put in a bunch of knowledge into about 30 seconds of conversation there. So I want to pick apart a couple things. One is you sort of talked about, knowing what you get really excited about and sort of curiosity mixed with things that give you energy, mixed with kind of the things you enjoy is the way that I took it is a really good way to sort of prioritize that portfolio. And sort of once you sort of have a feel for that, I always, when I'm talking to, folks interested in startups, everybody says they want to be a founder. And I always spend some time with them saying, are you sure? Are you sure you want to be a founder? Are you sure you want to be an early employee? Like what actually brings you that energy and kind of where do you, when you really have had the opportunity in the past to try it, where do you really draw energy from? And what's cool is I think you were talking about, you have a clear vision of what that means for you, and it's a good way to sort of prioritize. And so that would be the thing that I would maybe highlight from your description of your portfolio and how you're spending your time and resources, is it seems like you have a really good kind of feel and an idea for what those things are, and you're doing it. So awesome. The other part is you sort of talked about, effective entrepreneurs are coachable, and they focus on the problem. And, you almost, I'm not going to get on my soapbox here, but I love entrepreneurs that fall in love with the problem, and then just, chase it to where they find the truth. Not, here's my solution, you guys should all buy it. But, hey, this group of people has this idea, and you can't take all input from everybody about everything. But I think that coachability and the search for, kind of the curiosity to be able to get to the bottom of what's going on is, I think, a huge thing. So I just wanted to kind of unpack those two things because I think they're related, but they sort of get into a little bit of a different view here.
So there are two things I want to say. The first thing I'll say is I'll answer your second question, which is falling in love with the problem. And my mindset and thought process has evolved over the last few years around that. And I think I want to work with founders who fall in love with their customer and the audience to discover what the problem is rather than falling in love with the problem. Look, there's two ways to achieve it, right? So let's say I want to sell an efficient car, and I want to solve the problem of efficiency, mileage efficiency. So I can go to an audience and they say, well, that's great, but I'm not looking for efficiency. I'm looking for luxury. So now I could either solve that problem, or I could stay on my problem and say, let me find another audience, and I can go to a different audience to see if they had that problem. And there is that. But I think the best way to do it, and as I'm coaching and working with founders and entrepreneurs, I tell them like a better way is to go and find the audience and let's talk to them about it. Let's find the hero of your journey. Let's find Luke Skywalker, or let's find Obi-Wan, or Darth Vader or Anakin. Say, hey, what are you trying to solve? Well, I'm trying to kill Jedi, or I'm trying to I'm trying to defeat the Empire. Okay, let's see which problem I want to solve, and then that becomes your audience, and then you fall in love with that audience. You fall in love with Anakin, and like whatever you do, let's go kill those Jedi and get rid of all of them, right? Let's figure that out. How you can use the dark side of the Force to do that. So that's my first thing. I think falling in love with, I'm now more of that mindset of let's fall in love with the customer, because the customer is the hero of your journey and the story. Let's build a story around them. And it becomes, to me at least, it becomes an easier way of approaching that. The other part of it, Ilya, is the sort of how I kind of energize myself. I am not into predictability. I look for ambiguity. I look for uncomfortable situations. And I look for places where people are running around with a chicken, like a chicken with their head cut off and doesn't know where they're going. And I want to go in there in that messy environment and figure things out. That's why I'm not a good corporate player, right? Because I'm not going to sit there 9 to 5 and do the things that I need to do and check boxes. I just can't do that. Where I know I'm going to get a paycheck every 2 weeks. I'm not, this is going to happen. Of course, nothing wrong with a paycheck. Love that, keep them coming my way. But what I want to be in a place is like, I want to do the hard things about the hard things. And that's why I love that book, Ben Horowitz's book. I think everybody should read that. Like, if you can't, most times people keep on doing the same things expecting different results. And I think willing to do hard things and making changes and willing to disrupt is what I'm looking for. And that's what gives me energy. It's like, okay, problems have not been solved. There's a lot of unsolved, things here, and that's what I look for. Nothing is predictable. This thing could fall apart tomorrow, and that's okay. And I'm willing to take a chance there, and that's what sort of drives me with energy. Is like this unpredictability, this unknown, of the future, and because and maybe this is because of my own background, because never having this constant like lifestyle of staying in one place and building a family, always moving around and doing all of that. And but that's kind of like, I think, is built into sort of my mindset of like doing things.
Those are the pieces of your background, MK, that make you unique, right? And give you superpowers that have helped you build multiple businesses, right? And I want to be respectful of your time. So just a comment and then one final question for you. Okay. So a comment, quick comment, because I'm itching. I'm itching to go down this thread, but I know I keep you for another hour if I do. But a quick comment, man, I got to tell you, I could talk to you for another hour about the whole corporate structure and how sometimes those things just don't work. And the two things that I see, given the work that we do here at Mach 49 and helping corporate sort of like think through these things, is A, aligning of incentives for the people that they're going to bring in, and two, the governance, right? Entrepreneurs are not driven by paycheck. They're driven by equity. Equity is my love language, right? And it's most of their love languages, for the most part. So I'll leave that as a comment. My final question for you, my friend. Tell the audience something that's not on your resume that we cannot find on LinkedIn about MK. I know a bunch of fun stories that you've shared with me, but is there anything that you feel comfortable sharing with the audience that's not on your resume that you like to end on?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll tell you something that's not on my resume, and I think a lot of people may or may not know about it. But I tell the story every chance I get to people that are close to me or people that I can become vulnerable with. So I'll be a little bit vulnerable here. My understanding of this process of going to market and understanding customer segmentation actually developed through an experience of selling vacuum cleaners door to door. And that is not on my resume as a vacuum cleaner salesman. But back in school, way back when I was going to, in Alabama, this one summer, I had a dream. I know that sounds like very Martin Luther King-esque, but I did have a dream that I was going to make a lot of money that summer. And so there I was looking through the mobile press register, going through the classifieds, and there's one place where it says, hey, make a lot of money this summer, and I was like, great. I called that number, I showed up, and I found out that basically what they're going to do is give me a very expensive vacuum cleaner, a Kirby vacuum cleaner to sell. So if you think about it, right, Kirby vacuum cleaner, if you do all the math for inflation and everything, back in that day, it was $1,600. If you convert that into current monetary value, it's about $5,000, right? So this is back in 1993, and I'm doing this. And so I was like, okay. And what basically happened was I figured out that the lead list that they gave me was this list of very rich people, And when I ended up in one of their houses, they were like, hey, listen, you look like a good kid. Go out there and actually get a real job, because I'm never going to buy a vacuum cleaner because I don't need to clean my house. I don't clean my house. I don't even know how a vacuum cleaner works. So why are you even trying to sell this to me? I'm a doctor. My wife's a lawyer, and go find somewhere, someplace else. And so I ended up, in this McDonald's, trying to eat lunch, and that's where all great American stories start, at the McDonald's. And so basically is sitting there, and there's this guy next to me, like looking at me, and I'm like, hey, you got something to say? And he was like, I'm just wondering, like, like, what do you do, who you are, where you're from? I'm like, well, so I asked, I'm like, I'm trying to sell a vacuum cleaner. Like, I need a vacuum cleaner. And I end up in his trailer park, and lo and behold, at the end of everything, he buys a vacuum cleaner. And I'm like, wait a minute, this is what I need to do. So I go back, I've basically, find out this list of trailer parks, and I basically, the next 60 to 90 days, I just hit up every trailer park within a 30-mile radius, and I sell a ton of those Kirby's, of course, to poor people who would never probably can afford them, but they could finance them, and all they needed was to sign a check, and that was my commission. And I did that for one summer, and when I figured out, I was like, that's where your segmentation and understanding of your customer comes in, because you would think an expensive item like that could only be bought by really rich people, and they were not the right audience. They don't care about it. And turned out this totally unknown group of people that probably would want that. Of course, I would never do that again, because I sold my soul that summer, and I've been repenting since. But there's a lot of Kirby vacuum cleaners somewhere in Alabama, and a lot of trailer parks if you go and look for them. But there I was. But so that's something that people don't knows how kind of like how I learn about go-to-market strategy and market segmentation. And I use that example a lot when I'm coaching entrepreneurs. I'm saying, look, tell me, if I give you a vacuum cleaner, that's $1,600 or $5,000. What's your ideal customer profile? And they say somebody who makes a lot of money, somebody who lives in a big house, somebody who drives a big car. I'm like, wrong. And then I tell them the story, and they're like, wow, wait a minute, we would never have figured that out. And that tells you sort of, that's kind of what the experience of talking with customers and doing discovery and really understanding that audience is super important before you just go and try to solve any problem and build something.
Incredible. MK, it's been a privilege, my friend. Thank you for coming on the podcast, and thank you for being honest and vulnerable with our audience. I'm sure they're going to get a nice listen out of all the wisdom that you've shared today.
For having me, guys. Really appreciate it, Ilya. Thank you, Terrance. It's been a pleasure and an honor.
All right, my friend.
That was an awesome episode. We say awesome all the time, but there's some really cool and specific points that came up in the discussion for me. I think that the first one that really kind of rang true with me is that I just love that MK is really aware and focused on, kind of what is the skill set and the capabilities that he brings to the table, and is like super intentional about kind of what is his portfolio, about how he spends his time. And I think, if you can have that clarity, that intention, and kind of bring that to the table, it's a really, really huge thing. And so, that really kind of rang true with me. And for myself, I've really tried to, get better at that over the years. And so it's really cool to see somebody, seem to do it well. And then I think the other part is that, I'm always big about different perspectives, and that you can take a lot of different paths to a destination. And I think MK's background, both growing up as well as in business, really allows him to bring a bunch of different lenses, a bunch of different perspectives. And, just kind of thinking about it, he's got a lot of curiosity. He kind of has that variety of perspective, and I think ultimately for him that's a really strong superpower. And I think for many of our listeners can be a pretty strong differentiator as well. So that's really what stuck out to me. What about you?
Man, a ton stuck out to me in this episode about MK. Plus one to all the things that you said. The other thing is the thread of impact that MK has had throughout his career. If you really look at the roles in the companies that he started, and the roles as a chief product officer in the organizations that he was a part of, all of those opportunities were about adding impact, right, at scale for the world or society in some capacity, right? You think about the smart grid analytics company, right? Helping out, that's a something that helps the world and society, like working with utility companies. If you think about his role in helping out, as a chief product officer at a company that was going to help supply better sort of water and material and infrastructure in another region, I think those things are like important. So the thread of impact continued even after he sold his companies, right? You can hear in this episode how he got really passionate about the Mainstreet Fund and giving back to future generations of entrepreneurs. I can literally hear the passion in his voice and the energy that gave him, and how mentorship led to his first role as an entrepreneur in resident, right, at Itron. And if it wasn't for that mentorship and that guidance from people who've walked the path before and saw something different in him, and that curiosity that you talked about, and how his first role as an entrepreneur in residence, really came from, that person trying to guide him to say, hey, maybe you're in the wrong position, but not in the wrong company, right? Let me show you another thing where you can sort of feed your curiosity. And that led to his first entrepreneur in residence role at Itron. And lastly, from selling vacuum cleaners to selling his first company. Just what a journey, man. So those are the things that really stuck out to me, amongst other things in the episode.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just to pick on the vacuum cleaner story, it's it's amazing when people sit down and talk about what's going to happen. Everybody kind of takes their background and perspective and has a rational discussion. It's like, this is how it's going to play out. And I've been in so many situations where that plan, sort of the expert opinion, here's how it's going to play, just doesn't work, right? And I think it's really valuable at an early, and I think that was the point MK was making, is that, look, when you're out there and you're talking to people, you can know a lot, you can assume a lot, but when your map and the terrain don't match, you got to follow the terrain, and I think
Absolutely.
that's like a really salient lesson to pick up early.
And you guys might also pick up on that. We did something a little different in this episode, right? More free flowing, really getting into more details, and I think, we're going to experiment a little bit, like great EIRs do. We're going to experiment, we're going to test, and we want to hear from our audience. What do you think about these new formats that we're testing out? Ilya, anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We started the format by having sort of a reflection at the beginning of the episode, give you guys a summary. We got some feedback from some of the listeners that they just wanted to jump right into the discussion. We have really interesting people. And the synthesis was cool, but they wanted to hear from kind of the raw discussion first, get right into it. We took that. We're going to try this for at least a few episodes by putting kind of the reflection at the back, and then also giving us an opportunity to talk about kind of what's going on with the platform, what are we doing, and things like that. So this is the first episode, or at least an early episode we're going to try this on. And we'll see how it goes, and a lot of it is about, what do you think? What's good? What's not? Format. We'll continue to take feedback, looking for kind of the ratings and comments and things like that. And, we'll build this thing together.
Absolutely. We consider feedback to be a gift at EIR Live. So please continue to send us feedback. That's how we make the podcast better for you all.
Yeah, and then the last thing, we are also starting to do a couple things like physical events. Terrance and I recently did an event in Atlanta where we had some folks come out, and we did a little bit of a launch party and kind of an entrepreneur in residence happy hour. And so, kind of flagging communities that have a good, or at least a beginning density of EIRs is super helpful, because both of us travel more than we'd like to admit, probably. And so as we come out, kind of connecting with other EIRs, continuing to build a network, allows us to, kind of make connections, but also continue to sort of expand the foundation of the network. And so kind of any suggestions there are good. And then other things we're talking about is, doing kind of panels and discussions and things like that in places where folks are already aggregating. And so there's a lot of, amazing conferences, amazing discussions that happen on an annual level. So kind of we're thinking about some opportunities there. So would love to hear that. Terrance, what am I missing?
I think you got it, man. You covered it. We want more people to send referrals. Thank you for the folks who have been sending us referrals to the podcast. We want to see more people on the ground at these events. That this is the live part of EIR Live, connecting with real people in person and on the ground, beyond the audio that you're going to hear and the video that you'll see on YouTube and other channels, is making sure we bring these groups of folks who are in the same area but don't necessarily know that the other person is up the street and exists and have held the in-residence role in some organization. And it's going to be our mission and duty to connect those people and build a network around them.
Awesome. Let's leave it there. Thanks, Terrance.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on EIR Live. We hope today's episode offered you valuable insights into the entrepreneurial journey. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes, and check out the description for more details. Do you have questions or suggestions? Please reach out to us. Connect with us on social media. We really value your input. Catch us next time for more inspiring stories and strategies. Keep pushing boundaries and making your mark on the world. I'm Terrance with my co-host Ilya Tabakh, signing off. Let's keep building.